The scalding coffee hit Elena's face like liquid fire. She screamed, stumbling backward as the burning liquid soaked through her maternity dress and splashed across her swollen belly. The crowded cafe fell silent, except for the clatter of the ceramic mug hitting the marble floor. "That's what cheating wives deserve," Veronica sneered, her manicured hand still dripping with coffee residue. Her red lips curved into a vicious smile as she watched Elena clutch her stomach, tears streaming down her burned cheeks. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to steal what's mine." Elena's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the cold floor, her hands shaking as she tried to wipe the coffee from her face. The pain was unbearable, but not just from the burns. Her husband James stood 3 feet away, watching his pregnant wife writhe on the ground while his mistress laughed. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared. The other customers gasped and pulled out their phones. Camera flashes lit up the cafe as dozens of people recorded the pregnant woman's humiliation. Someone whispered about calling an ambulance. Another person muttered about the poor baby. But Elena could barely hear them over the sound of her own sobs. "James, please," Elena whispered, reaching toward her husband with a trembling hand. "Help me." Veronica stepped between them, her designer heels clicking against the floor. She was everything Elena wasn't anymore. Thin, glamorous, and cruel enough to hurt a pregnant woman in public. "Don't you dare touch her, James." "She's pathetic." That's when the security guard moved. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the standard black uniform of cafe security. Most people barely noticed him standing near the entrance, but his eyes had been locked on the scene from the moment Veronica raised her coffee cup. Now he pushed through the crowd with quiet authority. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" His voice was deep and calm as he knelt beside Elena. His hands were gentle as he helped her sit up, careful not to touch her burned skin. "We need to get you medical attention." Elena looked up at him through her tears. Something about his face seemed familiar, but the pain made it hard to focus. His dark eyes held a fury that made her shiver. But when he looked at her, they softened with genuine concern. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. The baby will be fine," he said firmly. "But we need to take care of you first." He stood and faced Veronica, who was still smiling like she'd won some twisted victory. "You need to leave. Now." Veronica laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the murmur of the crowd. "And who exactly are you to tell me what to do? You're just some minimum-wage security guard." She looked him up and down with obvious disgust. "Know your place." The security guard's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and dialed 3 numbers. "This is Marcus. I need paramedics at the Sterling Cafe on 5th Avenue. A pregnant woman has been assaulted with hot coffee." "Yes, assaulted." James finally found his voice. "Now hold on, that's a bit dramatic. It was just an accident." "An accident?" Marcus turned to face him, and something in his expression made James take a step back. "Your wife is burned and bleeding, and you call it an accident." The crowd was growing larger. More phones appeared, more flashes went off. Elena could hear people sharing the video on social media already. Her humiliation was going viral in real time, and her husband stood there defending the woman who'd attacked her. Paramedics rushed through the cafe doors within minutes. They wrapped Elena in blankets and checked her burns while Marcus spoke quietly to the lead medic. Elena caught fragments of their conversation. Something about priority treatment and making sure she got the best care available. "Sir, we need to take her to the hospital," the paramedic told James. "The burns need immediate treatment, and we need to monitor the baby." James looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Veronica, who was filming herself on her phone, probably posting about the drama for her followers. You should probably go with your wife," Marcus said quietly. His voice was deadly calm, but Elena could see his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Unless you have somewhere more important to be." Veronica grabbed James's arm possessively. "We have dinner reservations, baby. She'll be fine. It's just a little coffee." The crowd gasped. Someone shouted that Veronica was heartless. Another person called her disgusting, but Elena barely heard them. She was staring at the security guard, Marcus, and tried to remember where she'd seen his face before. As the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, Elena reached out and grabbed Marcus's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. His next words were so quiet that only she could hear them. "I know exactly who you are, Elena, and they have no idea who they just messed with." Elena's eyes widened as recognition finally hit her. But before she could speak, the paramedics were wheeling her toward the ambulance. Behind her, she could hear Veronica's laughter echoing through the cafe, not knowing that her world was about to crumble. The security guard wasn't just any employee, and this wasn't over. The hospital corridor smelled like disinfectant and broken promises. Elena lay on the examination table, while a nurse carefully cleaned the coffee burns on her face and neck. The baby's heartbeat echoed to the monitor, strong and steady, but Elena's own heart felt shattered into pieces. James paced near the window, his phone buzzing constantly. Every notification was another share, another comment, another stranger witnessing his pregnant wife's humiliation. The video had already hit 50,000 views and climbing. His business partners were calling. His mother was calling. The whole world was watching his dirty laundry get aired in high definition. "The burns are second degree, but not severe," Dr. Martinez explained, wrapping Elena's neck in gauze. "You were lucky the coffee had cooled slightly, but I'm concerned about your stress levels. High stress isn't good for the baby." Veronica strutted into the room like she owned it, her heels clicking against the linoleum. She changed into a fresh outfit and reapplied her makeup, looking like she was heading to a photo shoot instead of visiting a woman she'd just assaulted. "Are we done here? James and I have plans." The nurse's hands froze on Elena's bandages. She looked at Veronica with obvious disgust. "Excuse me, but visiting hours are for family only." "Oh, honey," Veronica laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm more family than she is. James and I have been together for 8 months. She's just a pregnant wife he's stuck with." Elena's breath caught in her throat. 8 months. She'd been pregnant for 7 months. The affair had started before she even knew she was carrying James's child. The betrayal cut deeper than any burn. "Get out," Elena whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Get out of my room." "Actually, it's James's insurance paying for this room," Veronica smirked. "So, technically, I have every right to be here." She pulled out her phone and started filming. "Look at this, everyone. The dramatic pregnant wife playing victim. Some women have no shame." Before Elena could respond, the door burst open. Marcus stood in the doorway, no longer wearing a security uniform. Instead, he wore an expensive black suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His presence filled the room with quiet authority that made even Veronica lower her phone. "Visiting hours are over," he said calmly, "for everyone except family." James straightened up, tried to assert some control. "And who exactly are you to decide that? This is my wife, my insurance, my—" "Your wife who you abandoned after she was assaulted," Marcus interrupted. His voice remained level, but Elena could see the fury burning in his dark eyes. "While you worried about dinner reservations. Before we dive deeper into this painful journey, take a moment to subscribe for more heartbreaking stories like this. You won't want to miss what happens next." Veronica stepped closer to Marcus, looking him up and down like he was something she might buy. "Nice suit. What do you do when you're not playing security guard? Personal trainer? Bouncer at some club?" Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Dr. Martinez, not to Veronica. "Make sure Mrs. Torres gets the VIP treatment. Everything she needs. Send the bills to this address." Dr. Martinez looked at the card, and her eyes went wide. She stared at Marcus like she'd just seen a celebrity. "Mr. Sterling? The Marcus Sterling?" Elena's world tilted. Sterling. The cafe was called Sterling Cafe. The business district downtown was Sterling Plaza. Half the city's skyline bore the Sterling name. And this man, the security guard who'd helped her, was looking at her with eyes that suddenly seemed familiar. "You're—" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "You're my cousin Marcus." The room went dead silent. Veronica's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. James backed against the wall like he'd seen a ghost. Even the nurse stopped what she was doing to stare. Marcus smiled for the first time since Elena had met him. It was a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, cousin. It's been a long time." Elena remembered now. Family reunions from years ago, before her parents died in the car accident, before she'd struggled alone through college, before she'd married James thinking she found security and love. Marcus had been the quiet cousin who always protected the younger kids, who always made sure everyone was safe. Now, he was one of the most powerful men in the city, and someone had just thrown coffee on his pregnant cousin. "This changes things," Marcus said quietly, his eyes shifting between James and Veronica. "This changes everything." Veronica had gone pale beneath her makeup. She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking. "James, we should go. We should go right now." But James was staring at Elena like he was seeing her for the first time. "You never told me your cousin was Marcus Sterling." "You never asked about my family," Elena replied, her voice stronger now. "You were too busy building your own." Marcus pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Thompson? Yes, it's me. I need you to look into someone. James Torres owns Torres Construction. I want to know everything. Finances, business partners, tax records, permits, everything." He paused, looking directly at James. "And I need it tonight." The blood drained from James's face. Torres Construction was built on city contracts, bank loans, and connections that could disappear overnight. Marcus Sterling could destroy his business with a single phone call. "This is blackmail," James stammered. "No," Marcus corrected, adjusting his tie. "This is family." Elena watched her husband and his mistress realize they'd just made the worst mistake of their lives. The security guard was gone. The quiet cousin was gone. This was Marcus Sterling, and he'd just declared war. The hospital room felt smaller now that everyone knew who Marcus really was. Veronica clutched James's arm like a lifeline, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive shirt. The woman who'd laughed while throwing coffee at a pregnant stranger was now trembling in the presence of real power. Marcus sat down beside Elena's hospital bed, his movements calm and deliberate. He looked nothing like the security guard from an hour ago. This was a man who owned buildings, controlled boardrooms, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. "How are you feeling, Elena?" "Better," she said softly, touching the bandages on her neck. "Scared, but better." "Good." Marcus's voice carried the weight of authority that came from years of running an empire. He turned to face James and Veronica, who stood frozen by the door like deer caught in headlights. "Now, let's discuss what happens next." James tried to salvage some dignity. He straightened his tie and stepped forward. "Look, Marcus, I know this looks bad, but—" "It looks exactly like what it is," Marcus interrupted. "A coward who let his mistress assault his pregnant wife while he stood there and watched." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. "Interesting business you built, James. Torres Construction. 43 active city contracts. 17 outstanding loans. All dependent on your reputation and connections." The color drained from James's face completely. Those contracts were everything. Without them, his company would collapse within weeks. His employees would lose their jobs. His own lifestyle would crumble. You can't just destroy people's livelihoods because you're upset. "I'm not upset," Marcus said calmly. "I'm protecting my family. There's a difference." Elena watched her husband realize that his affair had consequences beyond his marriage. She felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. For too long, she'd been the victim in her own life. Now she had someone in her corner who could actually fight back. Veronica finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. "We didn't know she was your cousin." "Would it have mattered?" Marcus asked. "Would you have hesitated before throwing scalding coffee on any pregnant woman? Or is assault only wrong when there are consequences for you?" The silence stretched between them until it became uncomfortable. Elena could hear her own heartbeat through the hospital monitor, steady and strong. Her baby was safe. She was safe. And for the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't alone. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "I've been watching you for a while, James. You think I don't know about the shortcuts you take on construction sites?" The bribes to inspectors? The substandard materials you use to boost your profit margins? That's... James started, then stopped. His face had gone gray. That's what? Marcus turned back around, his expression deadly serious. That's business? That's how everyone does it. Tell that to the families living in buildings that might collapse because you want to save money on steel. Elena stared at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. She thought she married a successful businessman with integrity. Instead, she'd married someone who put people's lives at risk for profit. The coffee burns suddenly seemed like the least of her problems. Dr. Martinez knocked and entered the room. She looked nervous, glancing between Marcus and the others. Mrs. Torres, I have your test results. The baby is perfectly healthy, and your burn should heal without scarring. You can go home tonight, if you'd like. Thank you, doctor, Marcus said before Elena could respond. Please make sure she gets the best pain medication available. And I'll need copies of all medical records documenting this assault. Assault? Veronica squeaked. It was an accident. The security cameras at my cafe say otherwise, Marcus replied smoothly. Crystal clear footage of you deliberately throwing hot coffee on a pregnant woman. The police will find it very interesting. Elena's heart raced. There were cameras, evidence. This wasn't just her word against Veronica's anymore. The whole incident was recorded, probably from multiple angles. James grabbed Veronica's hand and started pulling her toward the door. We need to go. We need to go right now. Running won't help, Marcus called after them. I know where you live, where you work, where you eat lunch every Tuesday. The city isn't as big as you think. They stopped at the doorway. Veronica was crying now, her makeup running down her cheeks in black streams. The confident woman who'd laugh at Elena's pain had disappeared, replaced by someone who suddenly understood that actions have consequences. What do you want? James asked, his voice barely audible. Marcus smiled again, that cold expression that made Elena shiver. I want justice for my cousin. I want accountability for what you've done. And I want the whole world to see exactly who you both really are. He walked back to Elena's bedside and took her hand gently. But first, I want Elena to decide what happens next. It's her choice. It's always been her choice. Elena looked at her husband and his mistress cowering by the door. Then she looked at Marcus, who'd appear out of nowhere like a guardian angel in an expensive suit. For months, she'd been powerless. For months, she'd accepted humiliation and betrayal because she thought she had no other choice. Now she did. I want them to pay, she said quietly. I want everyone to know what they did. Marcus squeezed her hand. Then they'll pay. But Elena, once we start this, there's no going back. Are you ready for war? Elena touched her bandaged neck and thought about her unborn child. She thought about the months of lies, the public humiliation, the scalding coffee thrown in her face while cameras recorded her pain. I've been ready for months, she said. I just didn't know I had an army. The first phone call came at 6 a.m. James jolted awake to his cell phone, buzzing violently on the nightstand. The caller ID showed his bank manager's number, which was never a good sign before sunrise. James, we need to talk, Robert Martinez said, without any greeting. His voice was tight with stress. All your business accounts have been frozen pending investigation. The city wants to review every contract you've ever signed. James sat up so fast his head spun. Beside him, Veronica stirred but didn't wake. She'd been drinking wine all night, trying to forget the look in Marcus Sterling's eyes when he'd promised him consequences. What investigation? This is insane. Anonymous tips came in about code violations, bribery, substandard materials. Robert explained. The tips included photos, documents, recorded conversations. James, they have evidence going back 3 years. How did someone get access to your private files? The phone slipped from James's fingers and crashed to the floor. Marcus hadn't been bluffing. He really did know everything, and he was using that knowledge like a surgical knife, cutting away every piece of James's life with precision. Veronica finally woke up, mascara smudged under her eyes. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. We're finished, James whispered. He destroyed us overnight. Across the city, Marcus sat in his penthouse office, watching the sunrise paint the skyline gold and orange. His assistant Thompson had worked through the night, and the results were spread across Marcus's mahogany desk like a battle plan. Bank statements, construction permits, inspection reports, and photographs that would end James Torres's career permanently. "The media is already picking up the story," Thompson reported, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. 3 news stations want interviews about the cafe incident. The construction violations are trending on social media. And Mrs. Torres called. She wants to see you this morning. Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the folder labeled Veronica Chun, Financial Records. The mistress who'd laughed while assaulting his pregnant cousin had built her lifestyle on credit cards, sugar daddy relationships, and schemes that were about to collapse spectacularly. "What about Miss Chun?" Marcus asked. "Her modeling agency dropped her this morning. The luxury apartment she's been living in? Turns out it belongs to a married city councilman who's now panicking about the scandal. She'll be evicted by noon." The sound of justice being served was sweeter than Marcus had expected. Meanwhile, Elena sat in her childhood bedroom at her aunt's house, watching the news coverage on her laptop. The cafe video had exploded across every social media platform, was trending worldwide. Thousands of comments poured in, mostly supporting Elena and condemning Veronica's cruelty. But it was the news about James's business that made Elena's heart race. Construction workers were being interviewed outside job sites, talking about safety violations they'd witnessed but been afraid to report. Former employees came forward with stories about corners being cut and inspectors being bribed. The husband she thought she knew was being exposed as someone who put people's lives at risk for profit. Her Aunt Maria knocked on the door and entered with a cup of tea. "That cousin of yours called. He wants to take you to breakfast." Elena touched her bandaged neck gently. The burns were healing, but the emotional scars ran deeper. "I'm not sure I'm ready to face the world yet." "Mija," Maria said softly, sitting on the bed beside her, "you've been hiding from the world for months. Look what happened when you finally had someone fight for you." The doorbell rang downstairs, followed by the sound of expensive shoes on hardwood floors. Marcus's voice carried up the stairs as he greeted Elena's aunt with genuine warmth. He might be a billionaire now, but family was still family. Elena found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone powerful on her side, someone who could fight back against people who thought they were untouchable. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood turned cold. "This isn't over, bitch. You think hiding behind your rich cousin will save you? We know where you are." The message was from Veronica, and it was followed by a photo taken through Elena's bedroom window from the street outside. Elena's hands shook as she screenshot the message and ran downstairs. Marcus was in the kitchen, talking quietly with her aunt about security measures and safe places Elena could stay. He looked up when she burst into the room, his expression immediately shifting to concern. "She's threatening me," Elena said, showing him the phone. "She's watching the house." Marcus read the message, and for the first time since Elena had known him, she saw pure rage flash across his face. He stepped outside onto the porch, his eyes scanning the street with the intensity of a predator hunting prey. 2 blocks away, a black sedan pulled away from the curb and sped around the corner. "Get your things," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm as he walked back inside. "You're coming with me." "Where are we going?" Marcus's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "We're going to end this. Today." The divorce courthouse buzzed with whispers and camera flashes as Elena walked through the marble hallways. 3 weeks had passed since the cafe incident, and the media circus had only grown larger. Reporters shouted questions at her from behind velvet ropes, their cameras capturing every step she took toward courtroom 4B. Marcus walked beside her, his presence like a shield against the chaos. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's yearly salary, and his legal team followed behind him like an army of justice in expensive shoes. Elena had never felt more protected in her life. "Remember," Marcus said quietly as they approached the courtroom doors, "let the evidence speak for itself. You don't need to defend anything. They're the ones on trial here." Elena nodded, touching her stomach, where her baby had grown bigger over the past few weeks. The burns on her neck had healed, but the scars of betrayal ran deeper. Today was about more than divorce proceedings. Today was about exposing the truth. Inside the packed courtroom, James sat at the defendant's table looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His expensive suits had been replaced with discount store clothes, his confident posture replaced with the slouch of a broken man. Beside him, Veronica wore dark sunglasses despite being indoors, trying to hide the stress that had carved lines around her eyes. Judge Patricia Reeves called the court to order with the sharp bang of her gavel. She was known for running a no-nonsense courtroom, and the spectators fell silent immediately. This is a divorce proceeding, not a circus. Anyone who disrupts my courtroom will be removed. Elena's lawyer, David Chun, stood to address the court. He was Marcus's personal attorney, a man who'd never lost a case that mattered. Your Honor, we have substantial evidence of adultery, financial misconduct, and domestic violence that we believe will expedite these proceedings. James's lawyer, a young public defender who looked terrified to be in the same room as Marcus Sterling's legal team, shuffled through his papers nervously. Your Honor, my client disputes these allegations. The affair was a recent development, and there was no violence. Recent. David Chun smiled and gestured to his assistant, who wheeled in a cart filled with evidence boxes. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A. A large screen descended from the ceiling, and suddenly the courtroom was watching security footage from a hotel room. The timestamp showed a date from 14 months ago, 2 months before Elena's wedding. On the screen, James and Veronica were in bed together, laughing about something only they could hear. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She'd suspected the affair had started early, but seeing proof that her husband had been cheating before their wedding ceremony made her stomach turn. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Order, Judge Reeves demanded, banging her gavel again. Mr. Chun, how did you obtain this footage? Hotel security cameras, Your Honor. My client's cousin owns the Sterling Hotel chain. When we requested security footage to establish a timeline of the affair, we discovered it began well before the marriage. James buried his face in his hands, while Veronica stared at the screen in horror. They'd been so careful, so sure that no one was watching. But Marcus Sterling owned half the city, and his reach extended into every corner of their secret life. That's not all, Your Honor, David continued, clicking to the next slide. Bank records filled the screen, showing massive transfers from James's business accounts to Veronica's personal accounts. Over the past year, Mr. Torres has embezzled over $300,000 from company funds to pay for his mistress's lifestyle. Luxury apartments, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, all paid for with money stolen from his construction business. The public defender scrambled through his notes, clearly unprepared for the mountain of evidence being presented. Your Honor, we weren't provided with these documents during discovery, because they were subpoenaed yesterday through the criminal investigation. Davidson replied smoothly. The district attorney's office has already filed charges against Mr. Torres for embezzlement, tax fraud, and construction safety violations. Elena watched her husband's face crumble as he realized the full scope of his downfall. This wasn't just about their marriage anymore. This was about his freedom. Judge Reeves studied the evidence with sharp eyes. Mr. Torres, do you dispute the authenticity of this footage and these financial records? James's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but James just shook his head. No, Your Honor, it's all true. The courtroom buzzed with excitement. Veronica stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. James promised he'd divorce her after the baby was born. I never asked him to steal money. Sit down, Miss Chin. Judge Reeves ordered sternly. You're not a party to these proceedings. But Veronica was spiraling, her composure finally cracking under pressure. You think you've won? She screamed at Elena. You think your rich cousin can fix everything? I'll destroy you both. Security guards moved toward her, but Marcus raised a hand to stop them. He stood slowly, pulling out his phone with deliberate calm. Actually, Miss Chun, I have something else to show everyone. The courtroom screen changed again, this time showing audio waveforms. Marcus pressed play, and Veronica's voice filled the room through hidden recordings. The pregnant bitch deserves everything she gets. When James divorces her, I'll make sure she doesn't see a penny. Maybe I'll even make sure something happens to that baby. The recording continued, revealing Veronica's plans to sabotage Elena's divorce settlement and even hurt her unborn child. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the woman's true nature was exposed for everyone to hear. Elena's hands trembled as she listened to the threats against her baby. But this time, the tears weren't from pain. They were from relief. Finally, the whole world could see exactly who these people really were. Judge Reeves looked disgusted as she reviewed her notes. I've heard enough. Mr. Torres, you'll surrender all marital assets to Mrs. Torres immediately. Ms. Chun, you're looking at potential criminal charges for conspiracy and threats against an unborn child. But as the gavel came down to finalize the divorce, a court officer burst through the doors with urgent news that would change everything once again. The court officer's face was pale as he whispered urgently in Judge Reeves's ear. Elena watched the judge's expression shift from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like fear. Whatever news had just arrived was bigger than divorce proceedings and embezzlement charges. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Reeves announced, her voice tight with tension. This court is now under federal jurisdiction. Everyone remained seated. The courtroom doors burst open as FBI agents in dark suits flooded in, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Elena's heart pounded as she watched them form a perimeter around the room. This had escalated far beyond anything she'd imagined. Agent Sarah Morrison stepped forward, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. James Torres, Veronica Chun, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and money laundering through organized crime connections. The blood drained from Elena's face. Murder? Her hands instinctively moved to protect her stomach as the full horror of what she'd escaped began to sink in. These people hadn't just been cheating and stealing. They'd been planning something far worse. Veronica screamed as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. This is insane. I never killed anyone. James, tell them this is crazy. But James wasn't talking. He sat frozen in his chair, staring at the FBI agents like they were executioners. His silence spoke louder than any confession. Elena realized she'd been married to a stranger, someone capable of violence she'd never imagined. Agent Morrison turned to address the packed courtroom. Our investigation into Torres Construction uncovered connections to the Castellano crime family. Mr. Torres has been laundering money through construction contracts for the past 5 years. When his wife became pregnant and threatened his relationship with Miss Chun, they began planning her elimination. Elena's world tilted on its axis. The coffee attack hadn't been random cruelty. It had been attempted murder, designed to cause a miscarriage or worse. The scalding liquid, the stress, the threats, all of it had been calculated to hurt her and her unborn child. Marcus stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. How long have you known about the murder plot? We've been building this case for 8 months, Agent Morrison replied. The assault at your cafe was a final piece we needed. Ms. Chen's recorded threats provided concrete evidence of intent to harm Mrs. Torres and her baby. The reporters in the gallery were typing frankly on their phones, broadcasting this shocking twist to the world in real time. Elena could hear cameras clicking, recording every moment of her husband's complete downfall. Veronica was dragging her feet as agents pulled her toward the exit, her designer heels scraping against the marble floor. You think you've won, she shrieked at Elena. You think this is over? The Castellanos don't forget. They don't forgive. Marcus stepped between Veronica and Elena, his voice deadly calm. The Castellanos work for me now. Have for 3 years. Did you really think I built an empire in this city without knowing who controls what? The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Marcus Sterling didn't just own buildings and businesses. He controlled the very criminal organizations that James and Veronica had been working with. They'd been pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. Elena stared at her cousin with new eyes. The quiet family protector had become something far more complex and dangerous. But as she watched him position himself between her and every threat in that room, she realized she'd never felt safer in her life. Judge Reeves gabbled the court to recess as FBI agents led James and Veronica away in handcuffs. James finally looked back at Elena one last time, his eyes filled with something that might have been regret. But it was too late for apologies. It was too late for everything except justice. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus knelt beside Elena's chair and took her trembling hands in his. "It's over," he said softly. "They can't hurt you anymore." Elena looked into the eyes of her cousin, the billionaire, the man who'd apparently been orchestrating this entire takedown from the moment she'd been attacked. "What happens now?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was warm and genuine. "Now you get to live the life you deserve. And they get to pay for what they tried to take from you." But as they walked out courthouse together, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that some battles leave scars that never fully heal. The real question was whether she was strong enough to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything she'd lost. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same cafe where her nightmare had begun, but everything had changed. The Sterling Cafe had been renovated with warm lighting, comfortable seating, and a nursery area where her 3-month-old son Miguel slept peacefully in his carrier. The burns on her neck had healed completely, leaving only the faintest traces of what she'd survived. "The quarterly reports look incredible," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the marble table where Elena had once collapsed in pain. "Your coffee shop chain is already turning a profit. 6 locations in 3 months. I told you that you had excellent business instincts." Elena smiled as she reviewed the numbers. After the divorce settlement and James's frozen assets were liquidated, she'd found herself with enough money to start over completely. But instead of disappearing into comfortable retirement, she'd chosen to build something meaningful. The Elena Torres Coffee Company was more than just a business. It was proof that victims could become victors. Through the large windows, she could see the construction site. Across the street, where James worked now, he wore a hard hat and safety vest, doing manual labor for minimum wage under the watchful eye of a foreman who knew exactly who he was. The man who'd once owned his own construction company now mixed concrete and hauled materials for other people's dreams. "Does it feel strange?" Marcus asked, following her gaze. Seeing him like that, Elena watched her ex-husband wipe sweat from his forehead, his shoulders bent with exhaustion and defeat. "No," she said softly. "It feels like justice." The federal trial had been a sensation that lasted 3 weeks. James received 15 years for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence had been overwhelming. Recorded conversations, financial records, and testimony from former associates who turned state's evidence to save themselves. Veronica had fared even worse. 25 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, and her connections to organized crime. The woman who'd thrown scalding coffee at a pregnant woman was now learning what real consequences looked like behind prison walls. Baby Miguel stirred in his carrier, making soft sounds that always melted Elena's heart. Marcus reached over and gently stroked the infant's tiny hand, his expression softening with genuine love. "He looks just like you did when you were a baby. Same dark eyes, same determined expression." "Thank you," Elena said quietly, "for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching his nephew sleep. "I should have been there sooner. I knew something was wrong with your marriage, but I respected your privacy. I should have checked on you more often." "You couldn't have known," Elena assured him. "I didn't even know how bad it had gotten until it was almost too late." The cafe door chimed as Elena's assistant brought in the afternoon revenue reports from their other locations. Each shop was themed around overcoming adversity, and they become gathering places for women rebuilding their lives after trauma. Elena had unknowingly created a support network disguised as a coffee business. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling out an envelope with official letterhead. The Victims' Compensation Fund from James's criminal case came through. Another $2 million. Elena stared at the check, then carefully tucked it into Miguel's diaper bag. "This goes straight into the scholarship fund for single mothers. Other women shouldn't have to go through what I went through without support." Marcus smiled with obvious pride. "You know, when this all started, I was focused on destroying them. But watching you build something beautiful from the wreckage, That's the real victory. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the window, they could see James arguing with his foreman about something. His face was red with frustration, his gestures sharp and angry. For a moment, he looked like the controlling man Elena had divorced. But then she saw him glance toward the cafe, notice her watching, and the fight seemed to drain out of him completely. He walked over the window and pressed his palm against the glass, mouthing the word sorry over and over. His eyes were filled with tears, his face hollow with regret. But Elena felt nothing for him now. Not anger, not pity, not love. He was simply a stranger who'd once shared her name. She picked up Miguel and held him where James could see, showing him the son he'd tried to destroy before birth. The baby who'd survived his father's betrayal and mother's assault was now healthy and perfect, surrounded by people who actually loved them both. James pressed his forehead against the window and sobbed, finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd lost. Not just money or status or freedom, but the chance to be part of something real and beautiful. He'd gambled everything on lust and greed, and he'd lost his family in the process. Marcus stood and walked the window, his presence enough to make James step back onto the sidewalk. He didn't say anything, didn't make any threats. He simply stood there as a reminder that Elena was protected now, that she had people who would move mountains to keep her safe. Elena gathered her things and prepared to leave for her evening management meeting. The Elena Torres Coffee Company was expanding into 3 new cities next month, and she had investors to meet and dreams to build. Her life was fuller now than it had ever been when she was married. Ready to change the world? Marcus asked, holding the door open for her. Elena looked around the cafe one more time, at the warm lighting, the comfortable chairs, the photos of successful women who'd overcome impossible odds. She looked at her sleeping son, who would grow up knowing that his mother was strong enough to rebuild an empire from ashes. I already have, she said, and walked out into the sunset, carrying her future in her arms while her past watched helplessly through glass windows, finally understanding that some mistakes can't be forgiven, only survived. Family always wins in the end.